Luckily for Ina, the money got from selling her things was quite good. Sama is really resourceful. Ina managed to fully pay the rent 3 months upfront, pay her monthly debt to her aunt, and she saved up a little amount for transport and food. It won't last her much, but at least she'll have a roof over her head, food to eat, and a place to go back to. Ina boarded a taxi right from the slum district up to the northern estates. It was really expensive, but today is her very first day working for someone who already vowed to make her life miserable. She doesn't want to give him any more reasons to end her. Ina easily found the address Patrick gave her. This is where Mr. Holker lives, and it was just as grand as she imagined. A typical home for the wealthy. Patrick was already waiting for her inside. Once she got in, he directly shoved some papers to her and asked her to sign them. This is the contract you'll be working under. You can read through it, but I was asked to inform you that your opinions do not matter and there won't be any changes made to the contract. That is no surprise. Ina decided to go through it anyways. At least she can stay informed on what she's getting herself into. As she read the contract, she realized just how much Mr. Holker must loathe her. He was indeed dead set on making her life miserable. She didn't expect any remorse, but this was worse than she had ever imagined. She would need to work every single day of the week and full-time, no days off. Her scope of work is anything he wants her to do, any time of the day, and only he could decide when to cancel the contract. Even worse, she wouldn't be paid a single dime. Her service is a payback for all she owes the company. No one with their sanity intact will sign anything like this. The rules go on and on, getting crazier and crazier. The consequences are even more devilish. Ina couldn't read any longer. It was like torture to her. She just decided to sign it since there is no other option anyway. After she sealed her fate, Patrick gathered all the domestic staff of the house together. Everyone, this is Ina. She is going to take over all your duties. The boss will be back tomorrow, so you only have today to teach her everything she needs to know about your respective duties. You better do a good job, otherwise you'll be held accountable if she messes. All of them were very professional. They did their best to give her an overview of how things work around here. The last person to brief her is the chef. She is a woman with a very hard demeanor. Ina isn't unaware about all of their concealed dislike for her, but they masked it well, so she tried her best to mask her own fears. "Welcome to my former workstation," she said as Ina stood quietly after her greetings were ignored. "I feel like giving you a very tight slap, girl, but I won't, because thanks to you, we all have been offered much better jobs in esteemed places and higher pay, of course. I got my dream job thanks to you. That leaves me conflicted, but I still don't like you," the chef said with a serious face. "So let's get to work. You better pay attention. The boss is very skeptical about his food." The chef didn't give Ina a hard time. Quite the contrary. She tried her best to explain every single detail, emphasizing main concepts. She even offered her contact information to Ina and urged her to call anytime she needs help. Ina understood everything the staff taught her. It is just basic home management, nothing extraordinary, but she still felt incompetent, unprepared, and ignorant. It was really nice of them to arrange for her to be briefed about her new duties, but she knew they didn't arrange it to make things easier for her. She wasn't ready to find out the real reason. She was able to leave home early this time and walk to the city to get a bus. There were many other laborers heading off to the North Estates. Ina was so anxious. She didn't interact with anyone. Patrick had already made sure to give Ina access codes and keys to the mansion. He also informed the estate security about her, so she didn't have any difficulties getting in. Ina immediately started off with doing the activities she was instructed to. The place was cleaned all over yesterday, since the workers were still here, but she had to repeat it instead of doing nothing. There wasn't really much to do here. According to the staff, they didn't have to work every day. They only came to clean and do chores twice a week. The chef only comes to cook when the boss asks her to, and she stocks most of the things in the fridge. Only the gatekeeper stayed here longer, yet he still had some days off. But Ina was expected to work more than 8 hours every single day. Apparently, Kodra prefers to keep to himself and doesn't want people around much, especially in his house. Ina had a car hoot at the gate in the late morning hours, and she rushed to open it. Her anxieties tripled instantly. A black luxury car with tinted windows neatly drove in. Ina knew who the possible occupant could be, yet she still hoped for a miracle. The car engine came to a stop, and for a moment there was total silence. The driver, a stern-looking young man, steps out and walks around to the passenger side to open the back door for someone. Ina, now standing near the car, kept her head low. Patrick got out from the other passenger seat. The driver opened the door, and a tall man with a commanding presence walked out. Kodra's face was unreadable, like always, and his silence was deafening. Ina couldn't see him, but she felt his presence. She could feel his gaze piercing through her. He stared at her for a few seconds, and without any word of acknowledgement, he strode towards the mansion, his footsteps echoing on the paved path. After the mansion doors shut behind him, Ina exhaled shakily. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath in. The driver got the luggage out of the trunk and made a move to take them inside the mansion, but Patrick stopped him. He called Ina over and asked her to do it. Ina carried the bags inside on her own. Luckily, they weren't that heavy. She didn't know where to take them though. She had planned to leave them in the living room, but Patrick made sure to inform her to take them directly to the boss's room upstairs. Before she could say anything, Patrick walked out and she had them driving out. Just like that, she was left with Kodra, all on her own. Ina wished she could run out of the house and past the gates, but that isn't an option for her. She had to take the bags up. Patrick made sure to mention that Kodra was waiting for his bags. Kodra was expecting her, so when he heard some movements at his door, he knew she had arrived. After a while, there was a mild knock on his door, almost like the person knocking hoped not to be heard. Kodra was silent for a few minutes, but he didn't hear another knock. Neither did he hear footsteps walking away. He wanted to make her wait longer to test the level of patience in her, but then again he also wanted to see her face, so he asked her to walk in. Ina was a little shaken up after hearing his voice permitting her in. She had thought he didn't hear her knock, but was still hesitant to knock the door again. Ina slowly opened the door and carried the bags in. Kodra was observing her every movement. She could feel his eyes on her, but she made sure to avoid his gaze. After setting the bags in the room, she wanted to make a dash for the door, but she couldn't just silently walk out, yet her lips refused to mumble a simple "excuse me." After some time of silence where she stood idly like a lost child, she decided to just walk out the second his burning gaze is turned onto something else. She got a chance when his attention was taken up by his phone. "Where do you think you're going? Who is going to unpack these bags and set my bath?" Kodra asked, freezing her movements. "I do not intend to remind you of what you should do around here. I'd like to believe you know your job, and for your own sake, you'd better," he asserted. Ina was so scared. That is a clear warning. No one told her she'd have to unpack his bag and set a bath for him. Do his laundry and clean the bathroom? Maybe, but not this. Ina slowly took his luggage to the bathroom that had the walk-in closet. She didn't even know where or how to start. She doesn't know how he likes his bath or how he wants his things organized. Ina fumbled around. She could only rely on her horrible luck now. Good enough, his closet is neatly organized. Everything in its place, so she was able to sort it all out. She prepared his bath with the products she found there. Once she was done, she carried the dirty clothes she had sorted, got out of the bathroom, and started walking towards the exit, praying hard she isn't stopped this time. Ina sighed in relief once she got downstairs. She felt like she had just escaped from a suffocating prison. She had felt so trapped and vulnerable in there. Ina wondered whether she would keep up with this. Sharing a space with someone who obviously lost you is no joke. At least Lillian masked her dislike for her very well. Ina went to the kitchen and started preparing lunch. It is close to noon now, so she'd need to get on track. She made sure to be very meticulous, cross-checking her work as many times as possible to make sure everything was perfect. That's how she did everything else for the rest of the day. She made sure there weren't any mistakes and she stayed out of Kodra's way. Luckily, he was in his room most part of the day, most likely getting some rest after his long journey. In the evening, once she set the table for dinner, she went to his door and knocked slowly like before. Ina hadn't informed him of lunch earlier. He came for lunch on his own. But it is getting late and her place is really far from here. She hopes he will permit her to go home. She isn't allowed to leave without permission or before informing her boss. She knocked and walked in right after receiving affirmation. Kodra looked quite occupied with work of some sort. Ina was just glad he wasn't staring at her. "Dinner is served, sir," she said after mustering up some courage. Kodra heard her but kept silent. This is the first time she had said anything to him today. He had been stealthily observing her and he was struggling to find fault in her. He didn't like that at all. He wanted to observe her more, so he didn't disturb her for now. He kept his distance. Ina's hopes to be relieved of work crumbled harshly. Kodra didn't say a single word. She quietly walked out of his room. It was getting darker and darker outside. She was really scared. She is yet new to the slums. Moving at night is not a good idea. After what felt like hours, Kodra came down to have his dinner. Ina waited patiently in the kitchen. He took longer than she had hoped for. Once he was done and went back to his room, Ina rushed to clear the table. She washed the dirty dishes, cleared off, changed, and rushed out of the mansion. It was so dark outside. She just hoped she would be able to catch the last bus. She didn't have money to waste on private transport means. Luckily, she got there just as the very last passengers were climbing in. Ina was so exhausted once she got home. It isn't because she was overworked, rather because she felt completely entrapped the whole day. She had to watch every single step she took, and it was very tiring. She practically dropped in bed and slept off after getting home. The next day, in the bus to the northern estates, she could hear the other laborers chat about their jobs like usual. Hearing the things they said, she knew she would never relate. A happy working experience just isn't for her anymore. Even if she somehow stops working for Kodra, she won't ever get a good job again. A little internet search will reveal her reputation as an employee who insults her boss. No one will ever hire her. Ina got into the mansion using the back door leading to the kitchen. She was on her way to the changing room when she heard a firm voice. "You're late." Ina froze at her spot for a while and slowly turned around. Kodra was fully dressed for work, majestically sipping his coffee. "You are to be here before I wake up, and my breakfast should be served 30 minutes before I head out for work. And I should be at work by 8 a.m. So use your little brains to gauge what time you should get here. And don't you ever make the mistake of leaving this house before I permit you to." Yesterday better have been the last time, he warned. "Yes, sir." Ina agreed meekly, all shaken up, even though she had no idea how she would execute this. Kodra walked out after that. Ina stood idly for a while before coming to her senses. She grabbed his bag and followed him out. She placed the bag in his car and rushed to open the gate. Once he drove out, she felt a lot better. At least she wouldn't have to deal with the pressure his presence produces today. Ina thought about what Kodra had said. The chef had told her that Kodra makes his own breakfast in the morning. She didn't mention having to make breakfast for him before he goes to work. How come now she has to show up before he leaves for work? At what time exactly does he expect her to leave home? Working hours here start at 8 a.m. In that regard, she is actually early. Ina was so toned, but there isn't much she can do. It's not like she could object. Ina did all her chores. There isn't actually much to do here. She had learnt every form of housework living with her aunt, so she was used to all of this. Back at the Holker Enterprises, Kodra was in his office with Claudia, the chief operating officer of the company. She has been working for this company years before Kodra took over. She's a really hardworking and reliable woman. "Kodra, please help me understand this. A lady insulted you, millions of people have seen it and are still watching it. She basically stole from the company, but she's not in jail. She is working for you in your own house that you barely ever allow anyone in. In fact, she is currently at your house on her own, managing the entire place," Claudia exclaimed in shock. But Kodra just ignored her. "She cooks the food you consume." I'm sorry, there is something I'm missing here because this doesn't make any sense at all. She steals from the company and gets a job in a mansion with so many luxuries? She laughed. "I see Patrick has filled you in on my private life," Kodra accused. "Private? Kodra, she betrayed the company. She gave her rivals a vital project that the Western branch had been working on. She dared to accept bribery for something owned by the company. She should be behind bars. No questions, Claudia said. My company, Kodra asserted. This is my company. I'll handle this my way, Claudia. Stay out of it, he affirmed. I'm sorry, but there is something about this that does not add up. You don't believe she did it, do you? You don't think she stole from the company? Claudia asked curiously. You came here to discuss something important, I presume, Kodra said, changing the topic. Kodra, do you have a crush on her? Was her accusation true? Were you really stalking her? She must be really pretty. Claudia laughed and walked out. It is very late in the night now. Ina is done with everything and now waiting for Kodra to come back. She knew chances were she wouldn't be able to catch the bus today. Yet she has to be back here by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Ina felt like bursting out in tears. This is clearly his way of punishing her. Kodra arrived late in the night. This isn't a new habit. He is a total workaholic. Ina, who had been expectantly waiting for hours, rushed to open the gates. She carried his bag in, prepared his bath, set dinner, and waited for him to come down. It took ages, but he eventually came for dinner. He just had his dinner and walked back to his room. Ina cleared the table and cleaned the dishes, but instead of running out like yesterday, she went up to seek for permission to leave. Excuse me, sir. Is there anything else you need me to do for you? She asked indirectly. Kodra knows exactly what she wants. He just stared at her desperate measures for a while and asked her to leave. Ina managed to get home, but it was very late. She had barely got any sleep before she had to get up and prepare to go back for work. Walking at dawn wasn't easy. It was cold and the streets were mostly empty. But that was her life for days to come. Kodra kept making things hard for her and kept her anticipating, messing with her safety by making her move at ungodly hours. Ina got home really tired and sleepy one night, but unlike other days, Summer's door was open and she was waiting outside. Ina, she called after seeing Ina. I've been meaning to talk to you, but you leave home so early and come back at times like this. It's 10 p.m., Summer said. Summer, I'm so sorry. I've been really busy at work. Is there something I can help you with? Ina asked, even though she had no strength in her to help in any way. What kind of work is this, Ina? You leave at dawn and come home so late. You work every single day as well. No rest. Is everything okay? Summer asked with concern. Everything is fine, Summer. Thank you for your concern. I really need to rest. I'm so tired, she said. It's him, right? That man in the video. He's the one torturing you. Summer pointed out in the heat of the moment, and Ina was visibly shaken up. I'm sorry, Ina. I watched the video. I heard about it from some friends in the neighborhood. It's okay. Everyone has practically watched it. Ina went to bed but couldn't fall asleep. It was silly of her to hope she could run away from that part of her past so soon. She wondered how Summer views her now. Everyone in this neighborhood likely watched the video too. And Tale, she wondered what her new friends think about her. They most likely regret even helping her. They must think she's an obnoxious lady facing the consequences of her actions. And she wouldn't blame them either. She did look evil and mean in that video. The information spread about her online didn't help much either. All the emotions Ina had been masking for the past days came rushing down on her, and she struggled to sleep. The next day, she woke up so late. She felt so weak, but she had to force herself to go out. She frantically got ready and rushed out. Ina had been going to work much earlier the past few days, so she hadn't caught the bus filled with other employees going to the northern estates. But this time, she did, making her realize just how late she was. She was so lost in thoughts during the ride, wondering how Kodra will react to her late arrival. "Hey, are you okay?" Ina's thoughts were interrupted by the voice beside her. She looked up to see a girl who was seemingly talking to her. She had seen this specific girl here in the bus before. She has a really vibrant energy. "I'm fine, just worried because I'm a little late for work," Ina answered. "But you aren't late. Working hours in the northern estates normally start at 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. for some workers. In fact, we're normally too early." "That's where you work, right? I've seen you around there before," the girl explained. Ina just nodded slightly. She had no energy nor will to explain that her own working hours are just different. "I've also seen you in the neighborhood in the south. You're Summer's new neighbor, right? She mentioned you," the girl said with a thoughtful look. Ina was a little shocked. She just nodded slowly again. Being identified by people isn't really something she looked forward to in her current state or situation. "I am Omi, Summer's longtime friend, and you must be Ina," she said cheerfully. The girl Omi was just as friendly as Summer. She stayed with Ina all through the remaining bus ride, and she didn't seem to mind that she was the only one talking, because Ina was silent. After arriving at the northern estates, they all went their separate ways. All Ina's fears came rushing back once she was on her own once again. Going through the mansion gates, she expected the worst, but she knew there was nothing else to do. Inside, Kodra was impatiently waiting for her. He felt like he had been too lenient with her. That's why she's walking all over him and disrespecting his command. Once Ina got in the house, she could feel the tension in the room before she even saw him. Setting her eyes on his ferocious gaze directed on her almost sent her tumbling to the floor. Kodra started walking toward her. Each clank of his fancy shoes on the marble floors resonated in her ear. He came and stood right in front of her. Ina was looking down. Although she couldn't see his face, she knew he was glaring down at her. She could feel it. He didn't say a word, so Ina mustered up some courage to squeeze out a greeting. "Good morning, sir." Kodra obviously didn't respond to it. "Explain yourself," he ordered in a deadly voice. Ina was scared to her bones. She felt like she had lost her voice, but she'd have to regain it before he loses his cool. "I'm sorry, sir. My place is so far from here," she tried to explain. "Shut up. I don't care where you live. I make orders, and you follow them exactly the way I want. Do you understand?" he warned. Ina was visibly shaking now. All she could do was nod nervously. "Words," Kodra growled. "I understand, sir." Ina swallowed. "I will let this slide for the very last time. For your own sake, there better not be a next time," Kodra threatened once again. He then started walking out of the house. Ina was still frozen to her spot. Kodra didn't say much, but the little he said was more than she could take. Ina forced herself to follow Kodra out with his bag, a routine she now followed. Ina set the bag in his car and rushed off to open the gates. As Kodra drove out, he lowered the windows to say his final words. "Since you came late, you leave late." After that, he drove off. Ina was troubled the whole day. She tried to do her chores, but so many thoughts kept disturbing her. She remembered Kodra's last words at the gate. He had said she would leave late today, as if she hadn't been doing that the past few days. Although she had been setting off for work at dawn when it's a little dark, there were a few people in the streets, and the streets would keep getting busier as she goes, since the sun is rising and it's a new day. But at night, it's a whole different experience. People are rushing to their homes and it's getting darker. It's so scary too, being with strangers at such late hours, and sometimes being all on her own on the streets. She couldn't manage to leave this house any later than she already did. Kodra took ages to return. Ina realized he would indeed follow through with what he had said earlier and make sure she leaves his place late. Once he arrived, instead of walking upstairs like he normally does, he remained downstairs in the living room, making himself comfortable on the couch. "Water," he said plainly, and Ina rushed off to get some. After that, he didn't say anything else, just sat there, keeping busy with something on his phone. Ina had nothing to do. She couldn't even set Kodra's dinner because the chef told her that Kodra only eats after freshening up. Ina kept checking the time, and she was freaked out by each passing second. After a long time, Kodra went upstairs and Ina was finally able to set the table. He took ages freshening up, and once he came out, he took even longer to eat. He didn't immediately leave the table after finishing his meal. Ina felt like crying. She had been going through so much mentally. The last thing she needs is to get attacked, robbed, or worse, in the middle of the night. Her physical health is all she has now, and she didn't want to endanger herself. After Kodra left, Ina was able to clear the table and do the dishes. She then went to seek permission to leave, and luckily enough, Kodra allowed her to go. The night was so much darker than she had imagined. Leaving the estate community scared her because it isn't safe out there. Ina didn't have much money on her, and she knew the last bus must have left hours ago. Just some distance from the estate gates was a car. There was a man inside too. Ina quickly walked past it, keeping her head low. After passing it just a few steps away, she heard the door being opened and she almost bolted away until she heard her name being called. Ina immediately recognized the voice. She turned around, rushed over happily and hugged Tale. She was so relieved to see him. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Wow, for someone so happy to see me, why didn't you answer any of my calls?" he asked. "You called? I didn't know. Have you been waiting for me?" Ina asked hopefully. Tale ushered her into the car and they drove off. On the other hand, Kodra had felt a little guilty for keeping Ina for so long. He knew it isn't safe for a lady to be walking around at such late hours. So he got in his car and slowly followed her from a distance. He didn't understand why he was doing it, but all his guilt was washed away after viewing the sight of Ina embracing a man in the streets and living with him. Kodra felt so angry for no apparent reason. He turned around and drove back to his house. In the car, Ina was still shocked by the fact that Tale had waited for her. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked. "Sama told me. She asked me to come pick you up. I think a friend of hers saw you here." "That must be Omi," Ina guessed. Ina was so grateful. She didn't know what she would have done this night if Tale hadn't shown up. He had rescued her from a helpless state in the night for the second time now. "Tale, I don't have enough money right now," she tried to explain, but he cut her off. "Come on, Ina. Do you really think I waited here all that long because of money? I'm past my working hours now. You're a friend," he explained. Ina was so moved. "How long were you out there, Tale? You have a wife and kids waiting at home," Ina said, feeling a little guilty now. That time Tale drove her to the motel, it wasn't even this late. Tale explained to her that she didn't have to worry. He had days designated to stay home with his family. Ina was rather sad. She has no days off, and she wouldn't have any family to spend them with even if she had them. "Ina, this is not a normal job. Who works this late?" he asked in agitation. Ina didn't say any word, and good enough, Tale didn't press on. The next day, Ina made sure she arrived at the right time, hoping to evade Kodra's anger. But that did not help. He was already in a very bad mood, and his anger was directed towards her for reasons she couldn't fathom. "Why is there so much sugar in my coffee?" Kodra growled. "I made it like usual," Ina explained meekly. "Are you calling me a liar?" he asked, making Ina shake her head frantically. "Taste it," he said, handing it over to her. Ina took the cup with shaky hands and brought it to her lips. She didn't know what to say after tasting it. She had never tasted his coffee before. She just prepared it the way she was taught to, and there didn't seem to be any problems till now. Kodra was clearly in a bad mood. Ina kept wondering what she must have done. Had she now been turned into a scapegoat? Anytime he feels angry, she would now have to deal with it. "So?" Kodra urged, demanding an answer. "I'm really sorry, sir. I'll make another cup," Ina suggested, not knowing what else to say. There is barely any sugar in the coffee. She is shocked he is complaining of the opposite. "I do not have time for that, and you do not have the right to waste food in my house. I'm already feeding you as it is. Don't think I'm unaware of that. This just adds to your debt," he spat, taking back the coffee from her. "Get those papers. Read page 6, article 17, out loud," he instructed. Ina got the newspaper that was laying on the table and located the article he instructed her to read. On finding it, Ina's hand started shaking. Her knees weakened. She was all shaky and sweaty. Her eyes were clogged with tears. Her throat ached. She felt all her sins of the past were being thrown right back at her. "I'm waiting. Be clear. Do not stutter. Word for word," he ordered. For as long as Ina could remember, she has always had the habit of silently taking any kind of insults and scoldings. She couldn't speak, nor could she cry. All those equated to harsh punishments. That's how she was forced to live right from childhood. And she has gotten used to it. Whenever faced with a trying situation, her strength lies in keeping quiet. That's how she doesn't lose her sanity and get a panic attack. She really didn't have a great childhood. The memories are still haunting. That's why it took every single bit of strength and courage for her to stand there and open her own mouth to read out the most demeaning things about she herself and the disaster she had created. The article is about the viral video. Kodra is really a big deal in this city, so it only makes sense that a scandal of this magnitude was written in the papers. Ina and Kodra's pictures were boldly printed out. Her face is right there. A picture got from the video, and it really depicted her as a rude, obnoxious person. The article didn't help either. It is so long, and there are so many horrible speculations. The writer offered a more balanced explanation of the debates going on online, but the imprinted comments from the public were so harsh. They said some really horrible things about Ina and Kodra himself. Reading it all out was the most difficult thing to do. The more she read, the guiltier she felt. This isn't only about her. There was the constant reminder that she caused it all. She was now realizing how much of reputation damage she had done to Kodra. A man of his caliber was being bullied mercilessly online because of some things she said. Lies she had been manipulated to create about him. People were accusing him of using his status and power to abuse his female employees. All this while, Ina had thought she was facing the rougher end of this matter. Although there were so many evil speculations about her, she is just a simple female employee. Yet he is a man of power. So she was being victimized as an innocent girl who's been harassed by her boss. So many people were milking this story. The public has a habit of supporting the most helpless group, and in this case, it is her. Kodra is clearly torturing her. He wants her to realize the magnitude of damage she had caused, and he succeeded. Ina was used to being treated in all kinds of ways. She has always been the one on the receiving end. But having to read all these harsh words out, she felt like she was attacking her own self. Despite stuttering and losing her voice several times, she somehow managed to finish reading the tormenting article, word for word, like instructed. Kodra did not say anything all through. He just kept having his meal like there wasn't a girl having a mental breakdown standing right before him. Once he was done, he stood up and walked out. Ina didn't have the strength to follow him, and he didn't ask her to. Ina was depressed the whole day. That article completely broke her. She kept going through it. She couldn't stop herself. She had sold her phone to avoid having to see what people were speculating online, but it still found its way to her. Ina realized this article was published about a week ago. Why did Kodra make her read it today? The article just presented a small percentage of the drama online. Imagine how nasty it must be online. He obviously sees it all. It must really affect him. Why isn't he doing anything about it? He can easily have his team clear his name and tell the truth. He can put an end to all the debates online by pointing to her as the only one on the wrong. He could even inform them about the fraudulent accusation the company has against her to be more convincing. To top it off, she is at his mercy now. He can easily have her tell the public the whole truth to clear his name, and she would do it. Why isn't he doing any of that? Ina was now realizing that being in this house and doing a few house chores was in fact more than generous. Leave alone all the destruction she had caused online, they have evidence against her for such a serious crime. against the company. How come she isn't in jail? What is he seriously up to? This whole thing does not add up. After all this damage she had caused, all she gets is normal house chores. Aside from making her go home extra late, he isn't even abusive. Nothing close to what she went through in her aunt's house. Ina did all her chores robotically. Kodra got home really early that day. His driver drove him back today. He always drives on his own, so that was kind of new. Ina had been hopeful that she would leave early this day, but soon enough, she realized that wasn't going to happen at all. The reason Kodra left office early is because he carried work home. He didn't take it to his room like most times. He decided to work downstairs, and Ina was uncomfortable all through. Kodra was so fixated and it seemed like she wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. Ina had thought the extraordinary delay she endured yesterday was as a punishment for arriving late, so she had done her best to be early today, but it seemed like her punishment was outstretched. Tale called her at some point. He informed her that he was outside the estate gates waiting for her like yesterday. "Thank you so much, Tale, but you really don't have to wait. I'm going to be here for much longer. I can manage on my own," she said, obviously lying. Tale refused to go home. He informed her that he would make a few rounds in the city and she could call him when she's done. He is a taxi driver after all. This is just a chance to make more money. Ina was really grateful. She couldn't turn down the offer because in all honesty, she had no idea what time Kodra would set her free. And she strongly believes it won't be at a godly hour. Tale drove Ina home just like he had promised to, and he did this for a few days as well. Kodra just kept getting worse and worse with his means of unnecessary delay. He could come up with anything just to torture her and make her run about. It is worse on weekends where he could spend the whole day at home and Ina would have no rest, but she had resolved in her heart that she deserved it all and more. It is a Sunday today, so Tale will be home with his family. Although he had offered to come pick Ina up, she wasn't having it. She didn't want the chaos in her own life to disorganize his more than it already has. Besides, it's not like she's paying him for his services. At least on other days, he just drove her back since he was headed home anyway. Ina couldn't accept him leaving his home just to come pick her up. She knows Kodra won't allow her to leave early, and it isn't safe at night. Even if she somehow manages to go home, Sama will tell Tali about it. She doesn't want them to worry, so she needs to come up with a different plan. So that night, Ina called Tale and informed him that he doesn't have to come pick her up because her boss was generous enough to offer a room for her to spend the night. "Does that mean you'll stay there now? Will you move out of your house?" Tale asked. "No, it's just for today. He said I can spend the night here whenever work ends late, since it's not safe to move at night. So it's just a momentary arrangement," she explained. "But your work ends late every single day," Tale pointed out. "I guess so, but at least I don't have to leave in the middle of the night now. Which also means you can go back home to your wife and kids earlier now." Ina managed to convince him eventually. She didn't realize that someone had listened in on her entire conversation. Just like Ina had suspected, Kodra made sure she ran errands until 11 p.m., close to midnight. That's how crazy it was this day, and it was the worst one too. Every single day, He keeps her longer than the previous day. Ina knew she'd be here till midnight tomorrow, following his pattern of absurdity. Ina changed, and instead of rushing out of the gates like she normally does, she snuck into the gatehouse after she made sure no one is looking. She had cleaned this place a few weeks ago and remembers seeing a bed here. There are no sheets, but this would do. No one comes here. This is where the gatekeeper used to sleep, and since he left, the place is empty. Ina decided to spend the night here. She is basically the new gatekeeper anyway. This is a bold move. If Kodra catches her here, she won't hear the end of it. She doesn't have much of a choice though. She can't walk all the way home at this hour. Even if she had money for transport, it still isn't safe at all. A few minutes after she got in, she had a car engine come to life, and she saw Dave, the driver, driving out. He had been staying here very late too. Ina wondered whether he had also done something to annoy the boss. Otherwise, there is no clear reason as to why he had to stay here for so long, doing nothing. Ina always leaves before him. She had thought he spends the night here, but she would always arrive here in the morning before he does. So it meant he leaves in the middle of the night, just like her. But at least he gets to drive home in Kodra's car. It was a really cold night, but Ina managed to rest well. She made a mental note to sneak in some warm bed sheets here. It felt so much better to just step outside and be right at your place of work. She didn't have to rush through the busy streets like always. In fact, she stayed inside much longer just to pass some time in order not to come off suspicious. After that, she snuck out and resumed her work, like always, before Kodra wakes up like he ordered her to. Kodra was a little shocked to see how vibrant Ina looked. She didn't look drained like she normally does. He hadn't even expected her to be this early today, since he had delayed her for so long. But it seemed like she was even earlier than ever before. Dave arrived to pick him up and drive him to work. In the car, Kodra asked the question he normally asks. Dave delayed to answer, contemplating what to say. Like always, sir, she was picked up by the same young man, the taxi driver. They seem like really good friends, he answered. For a while now, Kodra has been making Dave follow Ina out whenever she leaves and report to him exactly how she gets home. He wasn't allowed to give her a ride unless necessary, but rather just follow her from a distance. Dave didn't understand why Kodra made him do this. He has to stay at the mansion till late night and work full-time now. Before this, he would only be called when Kodra needs extra assistance. Kodra normally prefers to drive his own self. Having heard the story of who Ina is and how she came to work here, it was a little hard to fathom why Kodra was keeping her around him, in his private home for that matter, and why he was using him to spy on her. Dave was very angry at the beginning of this whole saga, but as time went by, he realized Ina really isn't a horrible person. He had indeed been seeing her live with a taxi man, but last night, that didn't happen at all. He had seen her sneak into the gatehouse. Dave didn't say anything to Kodra because he had overheard Ina's phone call with the person he believed to be the taxi driver. Dave had previously thought that they are romantically involved in some way, but on the several occasions he had seen them, they seemed like friends. He gained clarity after overhearing the call yesterday. He realized the taxi boy is a married man with a family, and Ina had lied to him so that he could stay home with his family. He decided not to tell Kodra the truth. He knew it was wrong, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Besides, thanks to Ina, he got a significant pay raise. So he decided to just observe what she's up to for a little longer before reporting to Kodra. Later that night, Ina had hoped to go home. It is a Monday, so Tale would be out in the streets. She could go home with him. She doesn't have clean clothes to change into here. She hadn't really planned to spend last night here. Her plans to go home didn't fall through because just like she had imagined, Kodra kept her around way past midnight. This time, he wasn't even working. After Ina had served dinner for him and Dave earlier, they had it, and since then, they have been watching matches in the living room. Ina was so distraught. She had to lie to Tale again because she didn't want to keep him waiting for that long. So she had no choice but to spend the night in the gatehouse once again. The next day, to Kodra's utter shock, Ina was very early once again. Kodra himself had struggled to wake up this morning because he didn't have enough sleep. He had expected that Ina would have it worse, but the young lady seemed to be sturdier than him. He was very irritated by this. He didn't bring her to his house to have a good time. On their way to work, Dave reported the same information to him, that he saw Ina being picked up by her friend, the taxi driver, last night. "Why do you keep insisting they're friends?" Kodra said in irritation. "It's just because I've seen how they interact. It's like how casual friends do," Dave explained. Kodra didn't buy that explanation. Why would anyone stay that late to wait for someone? He firmly believes Ina doesn't have enough money to afford such explicit services. It is either they are in a relationship or she's using that poor young man and playing him to get free rides. He is probably driving her to work as well. That is why she's always so early. Days went by and Kodra kept making life unbearable for her in hopes of torturing her and her taxi boy. But Ina took all his taunts gracefully. The gatehouse is basically her second home now. She hasn't set foot at the southern slums for days. Kodra brings most of his work home now. He makes sure to have Ina around him every single second for one stupid reason or the other. She has gotten used to his presence now, not in a mutual friendly way. She just isn't that uncomfortable around him anymore. His taunts are no longer shocking and dreadful to her. They are expected, and she is always ready. It is a Saturday, and Ina had just served Kodra his lunch when they both heard the honk of a car. It seemed like it was at their gate. That is really strange. No one ever comes here. Ina thought it must be Dave, but he doesn't honk when he arrives. "What are you waiting for? Have you forgotten your job?" Kodra thundered, and Ina rushed out. She decided to check out who the person is before allowing them in. She opened the gate and got out. On seeing who it is, she was immediately filled with dread. A resounding slap sent her tumbling to the ground.